Over the entire decade of the 1990s, Britain registered more than 18 million new cars. 18 million. That is one of the most explosive periods of mass motoring this country has ever witnessed. The high street, the motorway, the school run, all of them defined by a surprisingly short list of names. Ford, Vauxhall, a few continental challengers thrown in. But which single car sat at the very top of that mountain? Stick around. The answer might genuinely surprise you. If you love British motoring history, hit that like button and subscribe to Britain Rewind. There is so much more where this came from. The 1990s were a decade of transformation. Britain was climbing out of a deep early recession, Britpop was rattling the airwaves, and on the roads, a very specific kind of car culture was taking hold. Practical, affordable, fleet-friendly. The numbers behind these sales charts tell one story, but the cultural forces driving them are even more fascinating. Number 10. Vauxhall Cavalier. Before we get to the cars that truly dominated the decade, we have to start here, with the car that was still clinging onto relevance as the 90s began. The Vauxhall Cavalier had been Britain's company car king throughout the 1980s. Fleet managers loved it, sales representatives swore by it, and at its peak it had been the second best-selling car in the entire country. By the time 1990 arrived, the MK3 version was already 5 years old, but it was still shifting in serious numbers. Its combination of a roomy interior, smooth ride, and affordable fleet pricing made it the default choice for a generation of business drivers. Over 460,000 Cavaliers were registered in the UK across the first half of the decade alone. It was reliable, sensible, and deeply, wonderfully ordinary, but its replacement was already waiting in the wings. Number 9. Peugeot 306. Now here is a car that many Brits remember with genuine warmth. The Peugeot 306 arrived in 1993 and immediately announced itself as something a little different from the usual sea of grey metal. French in character, sharp in design, and genuinely enjoyable to drive, it brought a continental sensibility to British roads at a time when buyers were beginning to demand more than just point-A to point-B transportation. The GTI variant became something of a cult hero among younger drivers, while the Cabriolet was one of the most stylish open-top cars available at any price. Peugeot registered over 70,000 units in the UK in peak years mid-decade, and the 306 regularly featured in the national top 10 sellers. It proved that Britain's love affair with French cars was very much alive. But there were bigger players still to come. Number 8. Rover 200 series. The Rover 200 represents something deeply bittersweet in British motoring history. Here was a genuinely competitive, well-engineered small family car built in Britain, at Longbridge, in the heart of Birmingham, at a time when domestic manufacturing was fighting for its life. The 200 series, particularly in its R8 generation launched in 1989 and running through most of the decade, offered quality interior trim, Honda-derived reliability, and a sense of premium character that neither Ford nor Vauxhall could quite match at the same price point. In the early 1990s it was regularly placing inside the top 5 sellers nationally. At its peak, Rover registered nearly 65,000 examples in a single year. It was proof that Britain could still build a car the public actually wanted. But time was running out for Rover. Number 7. Vauxhall Corsa. When the Vauxhall Corsa arrived in Britain in 1993, replacing the aging Nova, it felt like a genuine step forward. Sharper styling, a more modern cabin, and a revised range of engines gave Vauxhall a credible small car to take the fight directly to the Ford Fiesta. And fight it did. The Corsa quickly established itself as one of the most consistent volume sellers in the country, particularly among private buyers and younger drivers entering the market for the first time. In 1993 alone it registered over 75,000 units, and those numbers held strong throughout the remainder of the decade. It was the everyday car of the everyday Brit, cheap to insure, easy to park, and everywhere you looked. The battle between Corsa and Fiesta defined small car Britain throughout the entire decade. And it was only going to get more competitive. Number 6. Vauxhall Astra. Step up a size and you arrive at the Vauxhall Astra, arguably the most consistently dependable performer on this entire list. Throughout the 1990s, the Astra never dropped far from the top of the national sales charts. It was Vauxhall's answer to the Ford Escort in the family hatchback segment, and for much of the decade the two were locked in an almost constant battle for supremacy. The MK3 Astra, launched in 1991, brought sharper styling and a more modern feel, appealing equally to private buyers and fleet operators. In its best years, the Astra comfortably cleared 100,000 annual registrations in the UK, making it one of the most important cars in Vauxhall's entire history. It was reliable, practical, available in a huge variety of body styles, and virtually inescapable on British roads. But here is where things get genuinely interesting. Because the top 5 cars on this list sold in dramatically larger numbers, and the stories behind them are even bigger than the sales figures suggest. Number 5. Ford Mondeo. In 1993, Ford replaced the beloved Sierra with something altogether more ambitious. The Mondeo was a truly European car, designed to appeal to every major market simultaneously, and it arrived in Britain with enormous fanfare. The press loved it. Fleet managers immediately moved it to the top of their lists. And within months it was outselling almost everything in its class. The Mondeo became the quintessential company car of 1990s Britain, the vehicle synonymous with the traveling salesman, the regional manager, and the motorway middle lane. It was refined, practical, decently engineered, and available in enough variants to suit almost any buyer. In 1994 and 1995 it cleared well over 100,000 UK registrations annually, regularly challenging even the Escort for top spot. More than just a car, the Mondeo became a genuine piece of British cultural shorthand. Number 4. Nissan Micra. Here is perhaps the biggest surprise on this list. The Nissan Micra, a Japanese-designed city car built at Sunderland, became one of the most popular cars in 1990s Britain by doing something none of its rivals seemed to manage quite so well, making everyone feel immediately comfortable behind the wheel. The second-generation Micra launched in 1992, won European Car of the Year in 1993, the first Japanese car ever to do so. Suddenly this was not just a practical city runabout, it was an award-winning machine. Older buyers loved its ease of use. Younger buyers found it affordable and stylish. It proved that Nissan's Sunderland plant, which had opened in 1986, was producing world-class product. At peak sales, the Micra regularly cleared 50,000 UK registrations per year, an extraordinary number for a car of its class. Now we enter the top 3. And this is where the numbers become genuinely staggering, where the cars stop being merely popular and become part of the fabric of British life itself. Number 3. Ford Escort MK5. The Ford Escort deserves its own chapter in British motoring history. It had been one of the country's best-selling cars since the early 1970s, and the 5th-generation model that arrived in 1990 was determined to extend that legacy. Despite a troubled launch, early press reviews were lukewarm and the model faced stiff competition, the Escort continued to dominate the sales charts through sheer brand loyalty, fleet volume, and Ford's unmatched dealer network. Fleet operators kept buying it in massive numbers. Families who had owned Escorts before bought them again. From 1990 right through to the mid-90s, it regularly topped the annual sales charts, registering well over 130,000 units per year at its peak. It was the car your dad drove, the one your driving instructor taught you in. For millions of British families, the Escort was simply what a car looked like. Number 2. Ford Fiesta. There is a reason the Ford Fiesta became the best-selling car of all time in the United Kingdom. And the 1990s were the decade where that destiny truly began to take shape. The MK3 Fiesta that carried the nameplate into the decade had been a revelation on arrival in 1989, sharper, more refined, and more grown-up than anything in the Super Mini class. By 1990 it had already claimed the number 1 spot nationally, with over 151,000 registrations in a single year. It topped the charts again in 1991. It was Britain's default first car, second car, runabout, shopping trolley, and motorway companion all rolled into one spectacularly practical little package. Available in an endless variety of specifications and engine choices, the Fiesta had something for absolutely everyone. No other small car came close to matching its combination of value, accessibility, and sheer ubiquity. Number 1. Ford Escort. And here we are. A car that, when you add up the total registrations across the entire decade of the 1990s, sold more than any other vehicle in Britain. The Ford Escort. It may not have been the most exciting car ever made. It may not have won the most effusive press reviews. But across the whole sweep of the decade, from the recession of the early 90s through the boom years of the mid and late 90s, no car moved off British forecourts in greater volume. At its absolute peak, the Escort was registering over 130,000 units per year. Fleet sales were colossal. Retail demand was relentless. The sheer depth of the Ford dealer network, the breadth of the model range, and a price point that made it accessible to almost every buyer, all of it combined to make the Escort the undisputed champion of 1990s British motoring. The decade belonged to it completely. What these 10 cars represent is something far more than a list of sales figures. They are the physical record of how Britain lived, worked, and moved during one of the most formative decades in modern history. The 1990s were a time of economic recovery, cultural reinvention, and rising consumer confidence, and the cars people bought reflected all of that perfectly. Practical, affordable, reliable machines that got you to work, got the kids to school, and filled the driveways of every housing estate from Cornwall to Caithness. Some of them were deeply unglamorous. Most of them will never be described as beautiful. But every single one of them meant something to the people who owned them, because these were not cars bought on impulse or passion. These were cars bought out of trust. And trust, in 1990s Britain, belonged almost entirely to Ford and Vauxhall. So there you have it, the 10 cars that Britain could not stop buying throughout an entire decade. If you want more stories like this, there is a Britain Rewind video coming up next that you are absolutely going to want to watch. Give this one a like if you enjoyed it, subscribe so you never miss an upload, and tell us down in the comments, which of these cars did your family own? We genuinely want to know.